My name is Mitch Larson. I do data-driven marketing, just like a lot of other people out there and a lot of other consultants out there. Kind of put my own twist on it, and it's a little more technically focused.
How did you get into consulting, freelance consulting, contracting, whatever you want to call this that we do?
Yeah, I guess so. How I got into consulting was I was putting in some time right out of college at a digital agency. So I worked in paid search, paid social, started getting more into analytics and really just more into reporting and working with more complex data sets. So I did that for 4 years. And how I was introduced to consulting was just clients of the agencies. There was consultants that worked there. So I met a lot of other people just on projects and they're like, hey, you should give consulting a try. So they kind of talked to me about it for it seemed like a couple years actually. Then when I was ready to really do something different, I was like, maybe I'll give this a try. And so I uh, actually EM was the first group that I got in touch with then when I started consulting. So um,
Yes.
yeah, but really just started kind of through the agency path.
And I've never met you in person. That's another thing that's kind of cool. It's like out in Minnesota, I'm here out in California. One of these days we'll meet each other. But um, I just love that's how this started, and I think we've been working together for 3 years, 4 years. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, we've been doing projects for 3 years now, so it's been a decent amount of time, and I'll probably end up getting out to the Bay Area one of these years now. So I'll be sure to stop in if I make it out there.
Yeah, definitely do that. Now that you're freelance consultant, what would you say is your favorite thing about consulting?
My favorite thing about consulting is being able to select the type of work that I do and the projects I take on. So right away, it wasn't really like that. I just kind of took any project that came my way. But now, after being in it for a few years, I can be a little more selective with the projects that I choose to do. So things that I find interesting or that would really fit well with like the services that I offer, I can just really just do those. And I don't have to do a lot of projects that, like at an agency, you'll get um, whatever comes in the door,
Yeah.
you'll get assigned to, and you do that. So that's probably like one of the best things about consulting. I think is definitely selecting the work that I get to do.
Yeah. I early on found that it's like the ability to say no. When you have an employer, you can't go back to, your employer and say, I don't want to work with that client. I mean, you might be able to do that, but for the most part, you just have to accept whatever they bring in.
Yeah, and another thing that I was actually thinking about. So back before I started consulting, it was always like seemed like this really risky thing to do. It's like go out on your own, do your own projects, have your own business. It just seems like society thinks of that as like a high risk thing to do. But then it seemed like in 2020 and even more recently, a lot of
Yeah.
companies like tech companies that I probably would, similar companies that I would work at and have a job at, seems to just be rolling layoffs, over the years. And I know some friends who have been in tough positions like that. And another thing that's great about consulting is it just kind of feels like this is a more secure option in a way than just putting all of your cards like with one company and just
Yeah.
working for a single company. So um, diversifying across the clients has been something else that it just feels really secure to me once you kind of get off the ground.
Yeah. I totally agree. This is year 19 for me. And I've had many conversations with friends or colleagues who want to go into consulting, and that leap seems like this huge risk. But what I tell them is the longer you work and the more clients you have and the more word of mouth you spread, the more secure you actually are than if you're just at one company and you're like, I hope they do well this quarter because if they don't, then they're gonna,
Hmm.
lay me off. So totally, that's what we see across all our consultants is if you're a good consultant and you do a good job, it can start to get more and more secure. Yeah.
Yep.
Um, so my next question is around growth marketing. We have several growth marketers in our community. One of them sent me this question to ask you, and it's simply, what third-party tools do you use to simplify the management of campaigns, optimizations, creative, and reporting? What are your favorite
Mm.
tools?
Yeah, that's definitely a big question. So I would almost split it into a couple different categories. So one is going to be like actual software that people would purchase. Then the other is like other third party and like kind of open source things that you can use on your own. So things that I like to do to simplify management is definitely having a really good uh, analytics infrastructure. So that is going to be kind of out of the box. GA4 is going to be one that I'd use. Obviously, Universal Analytics. Partner those with a Google Cloud and Google BigQuery data warehouse, so you can stream your GA4 data into that. Um, Definitely something that's really key. Google Tag Manager is another one for managing all of your implementations. Um, yeah, around the data side, that's really a big focus of mine. I'm not that big into the more expensive like management solutions of ad platforms. So I find that they're getting for most projects a little bit, you know, less valuable over
Mm.
time. Like as Google takes on more of like the bid automation, and it just feels like some of the power of those tools is a little bit less to me. So I don't really focus too much on those. Mainly like what is information I can collect and how can I display that back to the customers is kind of the big thing that I'm really focused on selecting the right tools for.
Okay.
When it comes to other like open source tools you can use, I do a lot of more technical work. So
Mhm.
as I mentioned, like my more style of marketing is focused on like really telling the story through data. So really work a lot with Python and SQL. So I do a lot of programming. So those are two tools that I really use to access the very key data sources that I need to be successful. So,
Mhm.
for example, a lot of projects that I focus on are more customized projects, I guess you'd say. So I don't do that. I don't do very many like, yeah, here's a straightforward e-commerce customer where it's like we're selling these t-shirts. We have a ROAS that we need to maintain in the channel. It's more of like we have this, it's kind of like a classic one that a lot of people in paid would recognize. It's like, yeah, we can track like the initial sign up, but like after that, we have no idea like if it turns in
Yeah.
anything or like the value is really hard to understand. So like some of the customers I work with are like in the manufacturing space where it's like a
Mhm.
more complex formula behind it. Or another one would be like in the auction space where you sign up for an account and like what happens after that is kind of like very difficult to understand. So I use those more technical tools to really tailor the whole marketing program
Mhm.
outside of even paid. Like I'll consult on like various aspects of like email and I don't know, it can be really whatever the company's doing to grow their business. But I wrap all that up into kind of one package that's easy for them to
Yeah.
understand and doesn't take a ton of time for me to like pull data and manage. It's just like always automated and it's like very tailored to the business. So those are some of the other tools that I use. There's kind of a lot of like custom development on stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, that's a great answer. Great answer, and actually brings another question of mine in to the top of my head, which is, are you self-taught, or did you have some technical background in high school and college and elsewhere that led you to this path? Because I can imagine a lot of our growth marketers who run campaigns are thinking, "Oh my God, all those tools! I can't learn this myself." Are you self-taught, or how did you learn some of your skills?
Yeah, looking back on it, it feels a little sort of a combination of like traditional learning and then self-taught. So I've always had a more analytical mindset. So things like that tend to click a little bit more for me. My university program in marketing had an emphasis on analytics. So I did have a good like data analysis
Mm.
like foundation coming out of college. And it was like, you know, very strong in like Excel and like all the kind of, you know, like tools that most marketers would use. So just coming out, I had that. Programming and SQL really came from I met some marketers kind of early on in my agency days that they were doing those things.
Mm.
And I saw some of the stuff that they were putting together, and I was like, that's awesome. So really, it started right out of college. Kind of like my first or second year, I started to learn how to code, how to write SQL queries, kind of how to use all those tools. And yeah, it was just self-taught. So kind of every morning I put in time. So kind of just made it part of my job. And what was pretty interesting about it though was and this is what helped me a lot, is I don't really get a lot from going into the online like learn to code stuff and you just start doing it.
Yeah.
I looked at my job and I was like, I have to do this analysis like routinely. So rather than like going into Google Sheets and like doing it and learning how to do it fast in Google Sheets, I suffered through doing it in like SQL or Python for a long time where I was like way less efficient, but I would do it in that almost unnecessarily too. Like it was like going out of my way to do things in that. Then over time, as I like related that to my role, it really helped me understand like how I could use it.
Mm.
So yeah, it probably took like 2 to 3 years to pick up on that skill set. And I would consider it more of, this is even a different topic, I would say, but it's more of like like if you look at a more advanced like analyst job or like data scientist type job, kind of that's all its own. It depends on the company what those are, but it's
Yeah.
more of like an analytics programming skill set. It's not like learning web development. It's, you know,
Mhm.
so I don't know
Mhm.
any web development. Like I know JavaScript and stuff for tracking purposes, but yeah, it's more of like a analytics specific skill set that I kind of wound up like understanding that that was different than web development and really focused tightly on that. And that helps because when you look at it, it's like looking at marketing. It's like you can't be an expert at everything in marketing.
Yeah.
So like
No.
that's kind of similar there, that you got to really pick what you're going to focus on and go from there.
Yeah. That's great. I love that story though. I love the story of you doing it the hard way for a couple of years and then it finally paid off. And it's paying off now. So that's great to hear. Um, Mac, I think you probably have a question or two.
Yes. I think this relates back to kind of what you were talking about earlier about how we've actually never met in person, but worked together so long. So my first question is, how do you manage your client relationships in a virtual world? And how have you found that to be, and any tools you have to make it more efficient and better?
Client relationships, I think a lot of my customers are referrals or people that I have met before doing a project with them. So that's been kind of made it a little bit easier for me. But some of the things that I do to manage relationships is like some classic things like weekly meetings, quarterly reviews on the program, um, answering any, like being available for them to answer any questions that they'd have, or if they want to talk about something, it's like for ad hoc meetings or over Slack. So some of that just like high availability stuff, I think helps a lot. Um, yeah, really, other than that, I kind of look at what they report on and do and spend a lot of time on, and almost go out of my way to say like, hey, how can I like help automate that annoying report that you do, and like kind of help build out various systems that they end up just really kind of making their day more efficient. So then we end up talking quite a bit about those things. So just through the work, then we end up talking a lot, and those things become useful. So yeah, I think it's I don't do anything really special beyond that, I guess.
But you'd be
Yeah.
surprised. I mean, what you just told me is pretty insightful on why you're successful as a consultant. You go right to the pain point, right? If you can get a relationship with a client where they're talking about what they're doing and they're struggling with, and you can actually make it easier, that's golden. And it's not just in analytics. It could be in any aspect. I mean, I've had clients who hate writing copy. They just
Mhm.
they struggle with it, and then and you know like I'll see drafts and I'll say, hey, do you want me to write that, because writing is something that comes easy for me, right? And then all of a sudden you're doing some of the work that they would have taken them a long time and would have been painful, and you just made it easier, and especially if you can teach them how to do that. So
Yeah. And actually too, something that's interesting is like treating your clients as not necessarily just like a client. It's like that's another person in the industry. So like there's pretty, like a lot of times people will leave companies in a year or two. So sometimes you find like consultants are there for a lot longer than a lot of employees are. So like a lot of times, like I will talk to them like it's not like a formal client thing. It's kind of
Mhm.
like, when they are going to do a different job or they're like, switching from this to that, it's like just taking the opportunity to catch up and be like, hey, how can I help you out? Or the other thing is too, like when people switch into consulting, there's people that have switched into consulting and it's like reaching out to them and saying, hey, I know you do great work. It's like,
Mhm.
I know like these couple opportunities that you may be a good fit for. And like just kind of thinking about it as like an industry professional and not necessarily like a client is something
Yep.
that I think that I do.
Yep. Yep. And totally agree with that. I mean, we've probably talked about this before, but a lot of our best clients become consultants, and some of our best consultants become clients. It's like, especially now, I think, and through the pandemic, there's been so much movement and shifting, and people's lives change so much. I feel like we're in the middle of a future of work movement where people are finally placing life before work. And if you do that, your life constantly changes. I mean, whether it's children or having to take care of parents or illness or whatever it is. And during different times of your life, you might think, I need to be a consultant to get more balance and control, or now is the right time. I want to go do full time. So I totally believe that. I have a different question. This is another question from the community, and it's around benchmarks. So the
Mm.
question is, what are the typical benchmarks you're seeing and seeking? And then how are benchmarks shifting at all, if you see shifting of benchmarks?
Oh man, benchmarks is always a tough marketing question. um, yeah, I'm usually asked to do a lot of benchmarks and like projections for, anytime you quote something, it seems like
Yeah.
that's part of it.
Yep.
Um, what I'm seeing is I get asked a lot about generally like what their CPA benchmarks would be or conversion rate benchmarks, sometimes CTR benchmarks, but yeah, kind of I run into a lot of just like the standard stuff that I'm asked. How I see it changing is, I mean, I feel like things are getting a little bit more expensive, but not as much as I think I hear online.
Hmm.
Um, you kind of go online and read, it's like, well, CPMs are out of hand and like
Yeah,
CPCs are out of
right.
hand. And it's like, well, the thing that's made benchmarks kind of challenging is that like a lot of the strategies in ad platforms, um, they just really throw off metrics in certain ways. So, if you look at like target or like maximize conversions in Google Ads, you could be running like a manual CPC campaign and your CPC, you can squeeze it down to like $1 or something that sounds really reasonable, but your conversion rates are low. Then you flip it to maximize conversions. All of a sudden, it looks like you're paying like $75 a click sometimes, but your conversion rates are also like way higher. So it's like kind of just weird to project. It's like you almost have to look at, I've been breaking out a lot of like individual, like similar groups of campaigns and saying like, here's the projections for those. I try to stay away from like, yeah, like your search, conversion rate should be this and the benchmark CPC that we should be at is this or that. Um, like really going to campaign specific or campaign group specific stuff is what I've been more focused on because otherwise it's almost impossible to get something that's not almost made up, I guess.
Are there any, I mean, I don't know if they exist. Are there any tools or websites that allow you to see how one company in the same category should be doing on any of those metrics? Is there some resource you can go to?
Kind of like, yeah, like tools like SEMrush and SpyFu and stuff will do some of that. But yeah, I've kind of just gotten away from even like trying to rely on any of that data. Just kind
Mhm.
of like the best benchmarks that, you can look at it's like, where do you need to be to make this work for your business?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like based on how much you're selling this item for or the service for and your rates through your funnel, it's like, what do you need to be paying per channel conversion to make this work?
Right.
Or like, um, if your overall customer acquisition cost from all sources and all spend needs to be this, how much can you afford to spend in this channel that's a little bit more expensive?
Yeah.
That's more of the approach that I would do these days rather than like going into SEM rush and being like, here's the classic projection through the funnel and it never
Right.
lines up to be what it is. It's just kind of
Right.
the initial pitch.
I worked at a startup where somehow somebody got some intelligence about cost per click by a competitor, and their cost per click was much smaller. And then I said, "Oh, that's great, but I don't know how they did it." And
Yeah.
how will we know? And that's a different brand, and maybe their pricing is different. It's too complicated. So I think it's a good guideline. Like if you found something's way off, then that might tune you into something else. But for the most part, you really just optimize what you can with your own things.
Yeah. And it's really why people are sensitive about like having other companies understand like what their margins are. And like they'll never push like profit readable into like anywhere that anybody can get it. Cause it's like
Mhm.
that is really where everything hinges on is it's like their margins and their profits. And like if you don't know what those are, like CPCs and everything like that, it's like, yeah, kind of just a guessing game at that point then.
Okay. Another specific question. This comes from Yvonne Schmidt, and she's asking, are you seeing brands spend more on Amazon ads than they previously had? And if so, any insight to why that is?
I'm not personally, but I also don't do a ton of Amazon advertising
Mhm.
at this time. So, but yeah, I'm not seeing anything like crazy more, but I'm sure that a lot of like I mentioned, a lot of the projects I work on are more like not like directly
Yeah.
e-commerce products.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
more, you know, different types of projects. So, I don't see them doing it, but I'm sure like just based on what I've been seeing, more people are spending there. And it makes sense because it's good to have some diversification in there. So
Yeah. Are there any other ad platforms you see money shifting into amongst your set of clients?
yeah, so I mean Google remains really big. So like Google search, Google shopping, and then Facebook, those all are kind of like still very core platforms. I see LinkedIn getting a lot more popular. So
Mhm.
I'm personally spending a lot more on LinkedIn these days than I used to. Um, then there's some other ones that are, a little bit smaller, like, but they're like the Twitters and, Bing and everything like that. They're there, but
Yeah.
generally a little bit smaller. Seeing a little bit more on like TikTok and Pinterest. So those are some more emerging channels in my opinion. So been having some involvement there, some in Snapchat. So I think it's becoming a little bit more diversified in terms of your options, which I actually really like. But yeah, I do see it shifting around a little bit, but largely it's like Google and Facebook still the dominant players. And something interesting with Facebook is happening is that like I feel like how the world looks at Facebook, or at least the United States, it's kind of like, that's for old people and nobody uses it anymore. But I found that it's actually becoming a really profitable channel because it seems like the older demographic who has a nice disposable income is,
Mhm.
yeah, they are heavily using it. So it's really great if you're going for like, you know, 30, 40 plus year old demographic, you can really drive some good results on Facebook.
Okay. That's great. That's great. I think Mac might have one more question. Do you have
Yeah,
anything else? Yeah.
I actually have two. I have one coming from Justin. Do you have any strategies for selling into clients that are wary of the price tag for your services? Do you ever have to deal with trying to sell yourself in that way?
It depends on the project. So projects that are more marketing oriented, where it's like, hey, we've got this, business we want to grow. I tend to accept a lot of customers that are kind of just that they don't have anything going on. So I'll do like, scaling contracts with people where it's like, hey, we'll make this work really affordably for you, like really early. So like, I mean, I've done projects that I've done just very, very low, almost negligible like starting rates that have grown into something significant. So on the marketing side, that's usually how I'll work into it. If they're bigger, then they're usually used to like standard pricing. But yeah, just kind of starting with something that works for them. And if I see potential, I can work with them to grow it. And then we're kind of both happy and in a win-win. Analytics, it's a little trickier for like those more, technical implementations. Kind of really depends on how like analytics savvy the customer is. So like if they know a lot about what they want and they know a lot about analytics and the value of it, it's usually not a problem with just standard pricing. Otherwise, yeah, it can be tricky selling into those, but I usually try to like pay attention to like what other like agencies are charging and other consultants and like land somewhere in there. So I don't just kind of make pricing up, usually just benchmark it off of what I know other people charge for the same thing.
Yep.
I like the concept of investing in them, giving them a deal towards the beginning that you work on with your marketing projects. That seems like a nice way to keep the project going and get more in the future.
Yeah, and if it's an early stage company and startups, they really appreciate that. It's like you're giving your personal endorsement into what they're doing, and then they'll pay it back if they grow or they get more funding or things start getting rolling.
Yeah, and usually like a response that I'll get from somebody with that proposals, they're like, hey, well, if we get to that point, that's a great problem for me to have to pay more money for. So it's like, okay, they usually want to get there and have that issue.
Yeah.
My last question for you is, what do you see for the future and what's in store for you in your future?
I haven't been asked that in a long time.
That's a loaded question. Feels like
I know
a
one
5-year
thing.
plan.
I think I see a trip to the Bay Area in your future.
Yeah, I would like that. I think actually thinking about it a little more for my future, like work wise, I think I would like to keep some level of consulting for a long time. So certain companies I really enjoy working with, I think that it's something that really will keep you sharp as you go on in your career. Just getting that diversity of, projects and challenges. I think I'll be doing some form of consulting for a long time. Something that I would like to focus a little more on is like building out a more product led business. So kind of taking on that challenge is something that I could see myself doing in the short to medium term. What that would all turn into though is probably just a little bit more time to go do the things that I like to do. So I'm already kind of feeling that a little bit, where now that I'm scaled up a bit, I can have some more flexibility. But I think that the whole goal of all that is to be able to, go and do a little bit more traveling, kiteboard when the wind is good, mountain bike on nice days, make all the events that I want to and everything. So that's kind of where I feel like I'm kind of getting there, but I hope that kind of really settles in here in the next couple of years. Just kind of going to enjoy things.
That's awesome. I think that's the desire all of our consultants share. It's like to get your life into a point where you can experience the things you want to experience and the things you love, you get to do more of them. So and sometimes that includes work, like you said, the great clients that you have, sometimes it doesn't really feel like work. It's like it's great to be able to help them. So anyways, I don't think we have any other questions. Thank you for your time. This has been great.
Yeah, definitely. It's fun to chat about stuff like that. So thanks for picking me.